All right, only 2 weeks left of the year before 2022 is officially over. We are here to talk about probably one of the most anticipated, if not somehow already controversial, because we can't have any Oscar bait movie without just a little bit of controversy involved. I'm, of course, Dom the movie nerd, and I'm joined once again by Kristen, aka Miss Filmingo, one half of the Mac Talks Movies podcast, right? That's what it is?
No, it's the M&K Productions podcast.
M&K Productions. I knew it was going to screw up the title.
It's on
at
that
some
same
point.
realm, but that's okay.
It's close enough.
It
Anyways,
is
we're here to talk about two movies today. We're here to talk about Darren Aronofsky's The Whale and at least the first part of Guillermo Del Toro's Pinocchio, both of which officially opened wide this weekend. All of that and more on today's episode of the Talking TV podcast. All right, Kristen, one half of the M&K Productions podcast is here to talk about a movie that we have both been looking forward to probably since the beginning of the year, that being Darren Aronofsky's first feature film since 2017's controversial entry, Mother. This film has been touted as a massive comeback vehicle for its lead star, that being the one and only Brendan Fraser. Fraser has kind of been a little bit on, I don't even know how to describe it, like a bit on the outs with Hollywood recently. He hasn't started like a major production, at least until last year when he appeared in Steven Soderbergh's No Sudden Move. Aronofsky has been known to make this kind of move before, as he did something similar with this back in 2008 with Mickey Rourke, kind of seeing like a late career comeback. So, Kristen, you and I have been looking forward to this movie for a long time, ever since we heard about it. Fun fact, this movie was actually shot in close to my hometown. I believe it was shot in, Newburgh in the Hudson Valley, but I have to recheck. I heard about it from a couple of my friends. This was last spring when they were currently shooting it. I was very, very much anticipating this, especially once I found out what the subject matter of the play was. So I want you to real quick walk me through, when did you first hear about this movie? What was it about it that piqued your interest? Walk me all the way through to when you saw it. Officially, because I know you got to see this a little bit earlier than I did.
I did get to see it earlier. Okay, so first thing, I knew Darren Aronofsky was making a new film, like in the new year. This is beginning of the year, so I was like, okay, well, how controversial is this going to be? Are we going to get another Mother, which I didn't really want? You know, we had Noah, like another theatrical religious tale. Like I was like. Are we going to get one of those rides? Yeah, I'm not here for it again.
I don't know what it is. It's like he made The Fountain, and then it's like after The Wrestler and Black Swan, it's like, I've had enough of those movies. It's like he's only good at making one of the two types of movies. The problem is he likes making movies more so that people don't really relate to, as opposed to the bits of his movies it's like people do relate to. So it's like, I don't know. We'll get into him in a bit, but.
Yeah, so I was like, okay. And then Brendan Fraser was casted, and I was like, oh? Like, that really sparked my interest. And then like Brendan Fraser enough, like him making a huge comeback, knowing what he did with Steven Soderbergh's film last year. Like he didn't play like a huge significant role, but he had a couple scenes. He was fine. I was like, all right, this is going to be the role for him to come back to, and I want to see it. And then we get that first still that was released a little while ago. Like I think it was like released over the summer, and I was like, ooh, why does Brendan Fraser look like that? And I went into this knowing nothing, not knowing this was based off a play, and just knew it had great praise since it had that standing ovation at Venice. And I was like, this is going to be the film I have to see. Like, this has to be. And then I went to go see it at my local film festival, which he was had a big honor, and he stayed for the entire performance of the film. And I was in the same row as him, so I was like, oh my God. Like right a few seats down from me. So I felt kind of cool to be like in that same realm and feel of Brendan. And you could feel the energy in that room. Like he was like, I'm going to deliver for this movie. Just watch all. And he delivered, I think, in this film. And it's so good.
So you're saying that like he definitely had a little bit of that, like, oh yeah, people, they're ready for me to come back. And he knew that.
Yeah, and he had a great standing ovation. He talked about everything, and Stephen Colbert was the one who did like an interview with him. And Stephen even acknowledged that we are in the middle of a Brendaissance.
So it's Brendaissance now. That's the official term for it.
Yeah, and he jokes about it. He's like, yeah, he's like, it feels good to make a comeback. Like you can see that now. He's like so appreciative of everything that he's been able to get, I want to say, over the last year and a half.
Yeah, because, well, it's funny because even though this is the movie that he's being touted for mostly, there's been a lot of stuff that he has been doing recently as well, not only on here, but on TV as well. Famously, he's been voicing Robot Man on the last couple of years on the HBO Max, on the Doom Patrol show. He's also set to make an appearance in, continuing with this trend of working with some incredible directors. He's actually set to appear in Scorsese's movie next year, Killers of the Flower Moon. But
Mhm.
I think in order to kind of understand more of the context behind this, we got to take this way back to kind of when what's it called, to when kind of this all started, because what I'm seeing with Fraser specifically is something kind of similar to what I saw with Keanu Reeves, kind of when the whole John Wick thing happened way back in 2014. Hard to believe that was 8 years ago now. Is that, I don't remember what it was, but I think it was like sometime after like 2007, 2008. Fraser hurt his back really badly, and as a result, he was kind of like denied from a lot of Hollywood roles, right? So the biggest thing that's kind of the big kind of talking point, right? Because for this type of movie, we'll get into the movie itself a little bit, but for this kind of talking point around the movie, right? You always have this situation of where it's like, okay, you have an actor who has kind of been like, not necessarily screwed over, but like kind of been cast out of the public limelight, that people like, and then after a while, the internet wonders like, oh, what happened to that guy? And then, he kind of makes this big showy comeback and they're like, oh yeah, we all love him again, And it's like, I don't know. In a strange way, I kind of feel the same way that Andrew Garfield did going into No Way Home, where it's like, yeah, but it's like, where were you guys when I was making all these movies? So I realized it's like, I don't know why I've always thought that I like had more of a limited like taste of Brendan Fraser beforehand, but then I went back and checked how many movies I watched. I'm like, oh shit, I actually watched a lot of his movies when I was a kid,
Yeah,
Looney Tunes
and
Back in Action, underrated classic.
yeah, and there's like a lot of stuff I didn't realize, like when I was going through the deep dive of his stuff, like I grew up with, even like the not so great movies, like even when he did Furry Vengeance, like I actually watched that when I was
watched that movie in theaters. It's crazy.
Yeah, so
I
it's like
remember
even
vividly
like
watching that.
like even he did like there was like one film he did too with aliens. I think it was like I can't remember the name, but there was like another one that he did. It was like an animated film, and I was like, I remember watching that.
Wait. Hold on, I'm looking it up right now. Is it is this movie Breakout? No, it's not it.
No.
Escape from Planet Earth. Escape from Planet Earth. That's it.
And like I remember like watching all this stuff, and I was like, why is he getting casted in all this stuff? And then it's like, we're waiting for it.
Yeah, well, it's so interesting. So if you follow the track of his career, right, he's kind of in what I call the Matt Damon, Ben Affleck class, because it was all those actors that were coming up in the 90s that were like all circling the same roles, other names that could throw in there. Cole Hauser, you could throw in there. Chris O'Donnell, you could throw in there. I believe that at a certain point, Ben's brother Casey was in there as well, although that might have also just been like a Good Will Hunting. Like again, Wahlberg later came in, DiCaprio was in there. River Phoenix was in there. Well, actually, I think that was actually when Joaquin started to make comebacks. I think River had already died by that point. But
yeah, okay, I see what you're saying. Yeah.
Yes, but so like you have this whole circulation of actors, and I call them the School Ties crowd because a lot of those guys did appear in School Ties. But it's like you look at Fraser's 90s, and I'm like, Fraser's got a lot more of a consistent 90s than you think, because it really all starts with Encino Man, then School Ties, then Son-in-Law, With Honors, Airheads, In the Army now. What's it called? The Scout. What's it called? George of the Jungle is the big one for me. Gods and Monsters, which famously a lot of people have said in hindsight that he also should have been nominated for an Oscar for. But this is where it gets tricky, because after Gods and Monsters, this is kind of why I feel like once he lands The Mummy, which is kind of posed as more of like a comedic Indiana Jones, essentially, pretty much, again, you see a little bit of a typecasting happen, where again, even though we know that he is a capable actor, he pretty much gets cast in these goofy comedic leads because it goes. What's it called? Because the timeline after this goes Dudley Do-Right, Bedazzled, another Mummy sequel, Looney Tunes Back in Action, what's it called? Journey to the Center of the Earth, which is a little bit of more of a comedic part. Mummy Tomb of the Dragon Emperor. He's got a cameo in G.I. Joe, the first one with Channing Tatum and Marlon Wayans.
Oh my gosh, I forgot about that.
Yeah, so it's like you have all of these goofy comedy parts. So I will say, I again, not to overcorrect it, but it's like the internet has almost been doing that thing that it always does, which is like, oh, where has Brendan Fraser been? And it's like, it's not like he hasn't been working. He's just been doing a lot of comedy parts.
He was just getting whatever he could get at that point, because I want to make the jump into the conclusion of this is like where the controversy comes in. Not many people know this, but like he came out and was sexually assaulted by somebody at the Hollywood Foreign Press.
Right, yeah.
And he got blacklisted. So he was taking whatever he could get as an actor.
Right,
so
which is that was just mind-blowing to hear in and of itself, which was just like that was just wild enough as it was. But it's like, so the point that we're kind of trying to come to is that the narrative around the movie that kind of generated was one that started off not really being about the movie itself. It was more so about the lead star, where again, a generally nice guy that was for the most part really well liked, that kind of got screwed over by this horrible system that is Hollywood, and now is just ready to like make a comeback. And again, it's perfect. Like, it's a really, really splashy part. It's all takes place in one setting. It's primarily a character study. For the most part, he's in every single sequence in the movie, so he really has to carry this. And it's a very, very sad movie. It's got a very touching, emotional ending. There's a lot of just there's a lot of car. It's an actor's wet dream, is what I like to call parts like
that's basically a good way to say it.
It is absolutely an actor's wet dream. But of course, it involves a fat suit. And we'll get to that in a bit, because apparently now that's the newest thing that people are going for. So I think we also have to talk about as well the A24 of this, because again, going into this year after last year, where again, A24 was kind of just recovering from the COVID pandemic. A24 always has like about like 1 to 2 movies a year that they can put all their efforts into. Last year they kind of got shut out of the race, because I think they were kind of positioning everything behind Red Rocket. But none of the movies that they really put out last year, I think, really had a big splashy effect. Versus this year, I'd make an argument to say that this year it's just been like hit after hit after hit, between movies like Marcel the Shell, Bodies, that Causeway
Everything
movie,
Everywhere All at Once.
But so that's where it comes down to is, when you first hear about this movie, you would think that this would be the type of movie that they would put all their efforts into for Oscars. But the irony being that Everything Everywhere, which I'm not going to say was a movie that they didn't have a whole lot of faith in, but was definitely a movie that's, again, they released it limited in March, limited in February, put it out in March. They're like, okay, it's this cool movie from like these directors that we've worked with before, that, again, they put out like a decent movie, so they'll get a little bit beforehand with Swiss Army Man, they'll get a little bit more of a budget. But Everything Everywhere, the friggin' momentum behind that movie is just surpassed almost.
And knowing the Russo brothers were attached to it,
that's
helps. What helped.
That's what helps, but I don't know how many people were actively aware of that going in. And what I like is that the movie, for the most part, has generated all of its buzz solely because of just how good of a movie it is, and I can't say that the same seems to have been said about this movie, at least not yet, but before we get into that, let's actually get into what this movie is and what it's about. So The Whale is based off of a stage play by Samuel D. Hunter. It is about, it features Fraser in the lead role as Charlie, who is a 600-pound man who is confined to his apartment. He teaches online college courses in order to pay for himself, and he is cared for by a live-in nurse portrayed by Hong Chow. And throughout the course of the film, he is basically made aware of the fact that he has, again, as a result of being 600 pounds, he is slowly dying, and he is attempting to make amends with all the people who are left alive to him, namely his daughter, portrayed by Sadie Sink. You also have how do you describe him? Like a traveling church, a Bible thumper is what I'll call it, portrayed by, again, it was so funny because portrayed by Ty Simpkins from Iron Man 3. Famous. It's funny because I remember everybody making the jokes at the end of Endgame when he showed up at Tony Stark's funeral, and everyone was like, wait, that's the kid from Iron Man 3? Holy shit, he was. And it was even crazier in here because throughout the entire thing, like, it was so unsettling seeing, like, like the face of the kid from Jurassic World, but onto like this like 22-year-old with like even looking hair. And like throughout the entire movie, I'm like, what the fuck is that kid's name? And I remember like halfway through, I'm like, Ty Simpkins, that's who it is. And I almost shouted it out in the middle of the theater. And
he's also from Insidious too. You can't forget about that.
That's right. But listen, I saw him in Iron Man 3, and listen, watching Tony Stark make fun of that kid was not like the highlight of that movie to me. But what's it called? And then he almost got eaten by a dinosaur. That I was so sad when he did. But and so you have this traveling Bible thumper, and basically what it all revolves around. I don't know if this is technically a spoiler, but people really don't care about spoilers when it comes to these types of movies. They only care about spoilers with blockbusters. Is that Charlie has essentially done this to himself because because he previously came out as gay. Well, didn't really come out, actually. He kind of abandoned his family for one of his students that he fell in love with, and then because of circumstances involving this church that also involved his live-in nurse, who was his former lover's sister, his former lover killed himself, and as a result, it drove him into this deep depression that has caused him to overeat himself, literally to the point where he is physically unable to function by himself. So kind of just starting off with the movie itself. Again, the movie is trying to get across, very similar to the stage play, I'm guessing, a lot of these themes about, again, grief, about what you do to yourself when you kind of are cut off from the rest of the world. This idea of attempting to find salvation, but through what means, essentially, trying to cleanse yourself of your sins. Like there's a lot of religious undertones throughout this movie. Again, because we as I think we've come to know throughout his entire filmography, Aronofsky loves to play around with this stuff. So I wanted to get your thoughts on that first, like kind of, all the themes that this movie is trying to get across. and whether whether this character is deserving of the redemption that he may or may not be seeking.
I think that's what the film tries to play off of most, like whether or not if it's subjectable enough to agree if he should be redeemed. And I like the fact of that because, based on our conversations, that's one thing I can agree about. There's one thing is he is like kind of a bad father figure for
Right.
leaving and abandoning his family, not taking full responsibility for what he did. But then he eventually like realizes that as soon as he like loses his partner, and he just basically goes in this self doubt of himself and dignity as a person. So, and that's where the story really caught my interest, because it's a redemption story that is told over the course of a week, and he's trying to make up for everything that he's done. And I was really invested in that. And knowing what he had done, he's not the person you would want to root for, but you root for him because of all the struggles that he really put himself through, knowing he lost his partner to, offing himself. I don't want to demonetize you guys and say the wrong thing. So
no, yeah. Well, it's interesting because it's like throughout the whole movie, it's like there's just like surprise about surprise about surprise. He's introduced in a very, I don't even know how to describe it, like a very shocking manner. When Ty Simpkins' character first knocks on his door and enters the room. I'm sorry. Oh my god, I'm using terminology that I've been picking up from acting school. It's ridiculous. It's gonna constantly
it's the inner actor in you. That's
yeah, exactly. I mean, well, again, it's like I was telling Chris a couple weeks ago. There's so many things now that I notice about like certain things that actors do in movies that I never would have realized before. And it's been mind-blowing to me. Like, this entire movie was an exercise on circumstance. And again, it's a thing that we're told where it's like, we are supposed to knock on the door. We are supposed to enter the room. And when we see something that truly pinches us, we are supposed to say, ouch, in so many different words. This whole movie is an exercise in that. But again, like, I always love when bottle movies are able to like kind of experiment and shift around, kind of the things and the structures that you would expect from them. And this is no different because, again, I think that with the exception of like maybe like some brief flashback scenes, you never leave this apartment. Like, you were with him throughout this entire time. And so what they have to do is
perfect COVID film.
It is the perfect COVID film. But again, it was still shot at the height of the pandemic. I'm pretty sure the vaccines hadn't even been rolled out by the time they were shooting this. And so as you're going throughout and you're discovering the more and more layers of this guy, and also I love how he is very still. The thing that I like about it too is that he's not his performance as the character, Charlie as a character, is not like this emotional mess. Like, he's almost kind of accepted his lot in life, and he's got like a little bit of a cheerful exuberance about it, if you will. He's
happy about certain things.
He is happy about certain things.
His daughter, he forces his daughter to be there.
Right.
He's just happy that she's there.
Well, like, he likes spending time with Hong Chau's character. He does like having some form of a visitor and Ty Simpkins. You have like the brief encounters with the pizza guy who constantly drops it off. But throughout the movie, as the layers are peeled back and you realize more and more and more that's revealed about him, because the information is deliberately withheld from us. First, obviously, about his lover, then about him walking out on Sadie's sink, then when Hong Chau has the conversation with Ty Simpkins about how, this all relates back to her and why she doesn't want him coming around because of what the church means and all that. But like, he doesn't mind itself, and it's almost like, in a strange way, I think it's the best instance of like all of these things happening to him that also like do and do not impact on him, because it's us as the audience being told. It's a really interesting, I think, adaptation of the stage play, because it's like, I see how this works as a stage play, and I can see how this would be a tough sell as a movie, and it really does come down to the writing. Like, I don't know how much Aronofsky changed about the original text. I personally don't even probably see that there was any, because I didn't see any co-writers on this movie, because again, the matter of just kind of like adapting this from the stage play again, like, it translates across perfectly. I think there's a reason why so many stories that we love when it comes to like, really allowing actors to give great performances usually come from stage plays. So the biggest thing for me coming out of this is that I absolutely understand what it is that people love about this movie. Again, it's immaculately well made. The performances are all across the board. Fraser obviously is getting a lot of the attention right now, but I also think a lot of credit needs to go to Hong Chau and Sadie Sink, who portray, who fulfill like these two crucial connections and parts to his character, as well as I think just giving unbelievable performances. Hong Chow, it's funny, it's actually been popping up in a lot of things over the last couple of years.
Mhm.
I famously was not a fan of what they did with their character in that downsizing movie, and I will never forget like seeing her for the first time pop up as the runner of a pleasure house in Paul Thomas Anderson's Inherent Vice, and a very, very memorable.
She was also in Artemis Fowl too. Don't forget about that.
Oh,
And then
God, don't listen. That movie doesn't. I already blocked that movie out from my mind the same way as the Percy Jackson movie. You don't need to go rubbing salt in the wound, pouring salt in the and lemon juice in the wound. All right, that one's still fresh.
My bad.
Thank you, Kenneth Branagh, for that one. But this is not the first movie that she's appeared in. She also appeared in another one of my favorite movies so far this year that's slowly been being talked about in each one of these podcasts, The Menu, which is like that is just such a treat of a movie. But her part in this movie, I think, again, it's the thing that I think is so good is that there is so much grief and sadness in this movie, but every one of these characters is kind of just taking it on the chin, and like that's so awesome because that's what people do, that people, again, people, they wallow in their grief, but they don't show that they wallow in their grief. And that's what makes it so good, And even though like everything that Sadie Sink in the movie is like, in a lesser movie, Sadie Sink would just be a completely one-dimensional, like shitty character. But the fact that it's like, there is all of this pathos and backstory that goes into her relationship with her dad and like how she both does and does not want to be around him. Like she hates him, but she also like is doing this as a rebellious act as an FU to her mom, but also because she's like, okay, like I also could be getting paid, but then how that relationship develops as well. It's like, it's all about these relationships that he has, with the small amount of people that have come into his life. And so all of that stuff, I think, works, and it works really, really well. Like, I remember I was watching Brandon's review for it, and he's like, the movie is, the biggest thing is that the movie is extremely well made. Here's the problem that we run into, though. Number one, this is going to be another one of those movies that is not made for normies, for lack of a better word. So as a result, you have a bunch of people on film Twitter that are going to heap a whole lot of unnecessary and rather, I think, unfair criticism on this movie that frankly has nothing to do with the movie itself. We're already seeing it with the stuff. And I think that is going to affect the movie's Oscars chances, unfortunately, because I think there was at one point where A24 was considering running this for Best Picture along with Everything Everywhere. Now, I'm not sure if that's going to be the case outside of Brendan Fraser.
And that's unfortunate because I think it does have the potential to be nominated as or considered as a Best Picture, but knowing they're going to push that, I would be disappointed for that because it's actually worthy of that recognition, I think.
Yeah, I agree with that. So that's number one. Number two, the fact that, and this is actually something that Dustin brought up to me, which again, I didn't really consider until now. So obviously, again, the famously, if we're going to backtrack and go with when we've seen this before with The Wrestler, right? Mickey Rourke was nominated for Best Actor for that movie, but he famously lost out to Sean Penn for Milk. I'm even more worried about Fraser because if you remember, A24 was putting a similar push behind Adam Sandler a few years ago with Uncut Gems. And then you have that infamous article from the Hollywood Reporter that comes out about that one Academy Award voter who explicitly gave reasons as to why the reason why Jennifer Lopez and Eddie Murphy and Adam Sandler and a bunch of other very big popular stars who were up for Oscars that year did not get nominated because they were viewed as populist stars. And while Fraser is not on that level, we also know that the Academy is unbelievably unfair and biased against previous comedic stars. Now, while Fraser doesn't exactly have that origin behind him, I don't think that his chances are hurt nearly as much. It was certainly a lot of things to consider as well, because a lot of people are talking about that he may have this performance and this prize in the fucking bag. And if you ask me, I'm like, based off just watching this, I'm like, yeah, this is the performance of the year.
Yeah, this
arguably.
is like worthy of it. Like,
yeah, I mean, the other two that are being considered is the big two front runners behind him are Colin Farrell for Banshees of Inisherin and Austin Butler for Elvis. But like, I'm like, if you ask me, I'm like, this is it, like, this is it. Of course, we'll get into the fat suit controversy and all that. But as far as the movie itself, I was watching it, and again, I'm like, I feel myself being emotionally moved by everything that I'm watching. And I'm like, but something's missing. I'm like, something's off. Something's not right here. And it took me a while to figure it out. And I believe I texted you this, but I'm pulling on my letterbox just to make sure that I get this right, because I still gave this movie, I'll spoil you guys a little bit. I usually save this until the end, but I'll give you my star rating now just because this does factor into what I'm about to say. I gave this movie a 4.5 out of 5. And while that was primarily for the technicals, right? My one problem that I have with the movie itself, and again, this is what I was talking about with Dustin, because it's something that I don't know if this is a thing that comes from the movie itself or from the original stage play. So I don't want to hold it against the movie if this is in the original stage play, which is that the movie, I don't know if it's trying to make us empathize with the character or not, right? I don't know if it's trying to make us empathize with this guy or essentially, or essentially like make us judge him because of the choices that he has. Now, an argument could be made that is the movie's that is its intention, is that it is trying to create this, push pull back and forth about whether people should like this guy or empathize with him or not, and be like, okay, he brought all of his own stuff on. My problem comes from the fact that, okay, the movie doesn't really seem interested in wanting to make a decision on that front, and that's fine. But the problem is then it's just, to me, making you sad for the sake of feeling sad, because at the end of the day, he still chose to wallow. He still chose to essentially eat himself to death. That's literally what's happened here, And while the movie starts off as like, it is, again, it's dealing with this idea of that there are a lot of things, deliberate things that are thrown in here. It's like, oh, do you find me disgusting? Am I grotesque? And it's all that. It's almost like he's wanting to challenge us to, like, again, not necessarily see the good in him, but it's like he is like sees himself so much as like this monster almost. Again, he reads this Moby Dick poem over and over again about about trying to catch the one whale, but it's like I can't tell whether like what it's trying to go for here, and it just it kept me confused the whole time, and that's kind of where I'm kind of stuck, if anything, because I'm like,
I can see that.
I'm like, I don't know. And so as a result, I'm like, the movie just feels like it's making us sad for the sake of feeling sad. And I think that kind of takes away from some of the bigger and better things that this movie has to offer, because it has a lot to offer, I think, otherwise, a lot of stuff about, like, again, learning to empathize with people who may or may not have who have done some pretty awful things in the past, because it's like, obviously, again, one would be taken to be forgiven with him at the end of the day, to forgive him, obviously, because again, he was a gay man trapped, obviously, in a circumstance, but also it's like, but was he necessarily innocent in that circumstance? Because as his ex-wife brings up, it's like, you knew this going in, but you just wanted a kid, and then the way in which he went about, like, leaving them, it's like, that's kind of fucked, and it's like, even though. And he's given all of these explanations throughout the movie as far as like why he did what he did and all that, and how he tried to get around it. It's like how he tried to do the right thing and throughout all this time. And it's like, but there's a lot of ambiguity surrounding some of those decisions as well. And so it's like, I'm kind of stuck there. That's kind of what I'm trying to figure out. That's what I was trying to hoping to, like, as far as figure out like what trajectory, what direction this movie was trying to take us, if any,
Yeah. And that's definitely one thing that I think I mentioned that earlier. And I think that's what Darren Aronofsky's intentions were for that film, is to make you, whether or not you be the judge of that, to say, is Charlie worthy or not to be, the hero, or, someone worthy enough to empathize with. But yes, it does. I will say he does a good job almost manipulating you to feel sorry for him. But I think he leads that up to the decision to, as the audience member, to say, oh, is he, like I said, worthy or not to empathize?
Right. Yeah, like the movie is very intentionally emotionally manipulative, and not just with Charlie. Like there is some sense of like there is most definitely a sense of emotional manipulation that is happening here, and it happens again with almost all the characters in the movie. Every one of the characters in this movie is emotionally manipulating somebody, because Hong Chow at the end of the day is trying throughout the whole movie to get him to go to the hospital and get him to get checked out. Something.
Yeah, she's always doing something, like checking his blood pressure, saying you gotta go, and he's like, no, I gotta stay here.
And then you have Sadie Sink's character, who is like just manipulating every single person that she's in the room with. Manipulating Charlie, manipulating the Ty Simpkins character.
Yeah.
The scene. I particularly enjoyed the scenes with the two of them, where she's like just
that one scene where they're just. I'm gonna just. Sorry, I think about it. They're just sitting at the door. She locks the door, and she ends up recording him.
You knew that she was recording him, though.
She was gonna do something, and I was
just based off of like how
what is she gonna do? And then yet. Her intentions were pure,
right?
What she did, and I was just like, okay, so she's not being that.
Yeah, so she's not totally evil, But meanwhile, her mom like views her as this like little devil figure, and it's like, okay, like I don't know what that's trying to say here, but yeah, and it's like it's all this different thing of, it's like where again he's playing around with this idea of, again, all of which I like. He does this in all of his movies. This idea of like people are great and awful at the same time. Those are usually the best movies, and those are usually the movies that relate to me the most. Is when directors are able to capture that, again, that humans can be the best and just the fucking worst.
That's the great part about this movie, because that's like even goes back to some of the earlier works he's done with Black Swan and The Wrestler, and
Requiem for a Dream, I think, is the best example of that.
Yeah. So
where it's like, again, that is one of the hard. And the other thing too that I love about him is Aronofsky is never scared to go there, like to just truly go there. I know a lot of people have criticized him for doing things for shock value in the past, so that's again why I hesitate with these criticisms of the movie, because I know that this is not the first time that he's done that. I mean, Mother literally has an entire sequence where a whole crowd of people rip apart and eat a baby. Like this is not anything new.
Yeah, this is not new for Aronofsky, and yes, it was like I'd agree for shock value. I will admit that. Mother is a flashy, shocky film.
Yes.
So, and this one is a huge improvement from that.
Right. I think the biggest difference is that Mother, once you realize what it is and what it is doing, it's like the shock value just feels like shock value. So I think that's ultimately what it comes down to with Aronofsky. So because Aronofsky's going to have a bunch of shock value in every one of his movies. What it ultimately will come down to is whether or not the subject matter deserves it and earns it. I think Requiem for a Dream, I think Black Swan, I think those do a great job of earning this. This one, the jury's still out on. Mother, I think, does not earn it, because you're like, it's literally just the book of Genesis. And it's not really doing anything. It's funny because I was thinking for the longest time, I'm like, what is it that Mother got wrong? And I realized, I'm like, it's the confined setting. I'm like, why do we care what's going on in this house?
Everything. I can't stand Mother.
Well, the Jennifer Lawrence thing doesn't help either, because I think by that point, pretty much at Hollywood and everybody, the public consciousness turned on her, now to the point where she's trying to make it seem like she was the one who invented the solo female action hero on that Variety 101. I'm like, pump the brakes. Pump the brakes there, Scooter. Like, come on. Like, wait, like, don't break your arm, patting yourself on the back too hard.
We got a whole feast, a table of lovely female leading actresses.
Like, come on, this is not even close to be the first time. First of all, it's like, really, I'm sorry. If Katniss Everdeen is the poster child of female action heroes, yikes. That is all that I got to say there. But,
definitely.
But I'm just like, yeah, I'm like, Mother, like, we don't even know what dimension, what plane of existence that is happening on. You have all these people that are coming into this house, but none of them are real people. You can tell that pretty obviously, And so it's like, why do we care if none of this has any effects on the world? I think this one works much better as a character study, because that's what it is. It's not trying to like have any of these like other big grandiose forces. Again, there are religious overtones. There are overtones about the afterlife. Again, he has almost like these I don't even know how you would describe them, but these flashbacks to obviously, with happier days on the beach, and I bet they're, that's trying to describe the idea of, was it just a fantasy? Who were these truly happy and meaningful for, and all that. But I like that this movie, at the very least, like, for lack of a better word, and this is another phrase that I hate, but it knows what it is and it doesn't try to be anything else. There are like a couple of different references and allusions to, like, I think this takes place like around the time of like the Trump Biden election, but those
does, because that's when it was like, it says it on the TV.
Yeah, but those don't really impact the movie.
No, they don't.
And I was really worried at a certain point that they were going to, but I was very, very happy that they didn't,
And I was trying to think, sorry to cut you off, but like, when was this play actually like released? Like, because I wonder if that was an actually like significant role.
I believe it was 2012. I would have to go back and recheck, but I think it's been about 10 years since the play was first released.
Okay,
but I don't quote me on that. You might have to go and check that one.
All right,
again.
Do a deep dive on that. Okay.
Yeah, but for sure. So like, what's it called? The only thing is, so as a result of how the movie goes, kind of, right? Again, there are several sequences in which kind of, he finally has this breakdown by the end. He's like, okay, I just want everyone to be completely honest with each other. And so he kind of like has this, basically there's this big revelation that's revealed about where Hong Chow was not aware of the amount of money that he previously had to his name, where what's it called? Where it's been the thing that's revealed throughout the movie is that he has been saving up all this money that he's been making from teaching these online classes in order to leave something for his daughter. But in reality, Hong Chow apparently was not aware of this. So as a result, she becomes angry at him, even though, what's it called? Because she apparently feels like she has been used by him because she thought that he had much less money. So she feels that she has been completely kind of manipulated as a friend. They had this great bond beforehand. And so that leads to the sequence of him kind of like breaking down, having this emotional outcry, this emotional outburst. He ultimately tells his students to just write something honest rather than continuing to write these BS papers, all that. It's trying to like have the characters come to this emotional crux and catharsis about being honest with themselves and being honest and being honest in the world, which is ultimately something that's very hard to do, especially because Charlie realizes that he's been a hypocrite this entire time because he's been, he's been having his camera off for shame of having his students see him. And you have that moment where he finally turns his camera on at the end and you see like
broke
the
me,
expressions
honestly.
from like all the different students. I thought that was brilliant. That sequence was absolutely brilliant.
And especially that third act of the film is when the tears will start to come out of anybody who goes to see this film. And especially
that's when it really that's when the waterworks are going to start, to quote
I mean, when I saw this with probably with about 500 people, and there was not one single dry eye in the audience. Including me.
Yeah, I know a lot of people were like really like, we're definitely feeling it in my theater. I saw it at the Dolby Theater at the AMC in Lincoln Center in front of the big screen. Oh, it was awesome. It really did make for a different experience. Now, before we move on to the other movie that we had, before we get to our final thoughts and star ratings here, I wanted to get your thoughts on the ending and because I think it's one of the first times in a long, long time that I've seen it cut to white at the end instead of a cut to black. Yeah. So it's like, obviously, again, we can pretty much figure out it's like that's the moment when he dies. Again, it's a little bit dramatic, it's a little bit showy and all that, because the whole time is it's like, his daughter is trying to get him to walk to her because, again, the whole thing is that he is so morbidly obese that he literally physically cannot walk.
And he's using a walker to get around.
So. Yeah, and then when Hong Chow brings him a wheelchair as well. But so I wanted your thoughts on the ending and kind of like what it meant and all that.
I thought that ending was emotionally brutal. Like, it felt like someone who was going toward coming to terms with themselves as an individual, like knowing he wanted to hear the whale Moby Dick poem one last time.
Right.
Like knowing those were going to be the final words coming, the words out of the daughter of his mouth. That's like, oh my gosh, like that's one way to go. Let me tell you.
Yeah.
And just knowing he's just using every single ounce of weight that he has left of him and energy. It's like, oh my gosh. Like she's like, I'm not calling 911. I'm going to read this poem. Like she's like, it's brutal. It's sad. And knowing that the way that Aronofsky chose to like not show like his body, but just knowing that Charlie got almost like a happiness to say, like he's gonna give, like Sadie Singh is gonna get that money, and knowing he gets to like redeem himself with his daughter to a degree, not 100%, but like knowing he can die almost happy, but not fully happy.
Yeah, he could die like at the very least content is the word that I
That's
would say.
The better word to say.
He can die knowing that he ultimately achieved what it is that he wanted to, this one last thing. Because like I said, this entire movie, it starts and ends where he knows exactly what is going to happen to him, and that becomes pretty apparent. Like that's not anything that's like ambiguous, I think. Like there is this underlying current of this guy. This is a guy who is given up and is just waiting to die. Ultimately.
He's just on his death. It's could have been called the deathbed movie.
It could have
been.
It may as well could have been. But I think the whale works better just for the symbolic nature of it. Or again, because the whole thing is it's like as far as the allusions to the Moby Dick section, it's to the Moby Dick poem. It is ultimately about how this whale is this creature that is kind of almost a nuisance for everyone when in reality all it wants is to just be solitary and left alone, but it has kind of become this obsession of this one person who just will not leave it. And as far as like how that connects, I thought that was really, really well done. So final thoughts and star ratings on The Whale before we move on to Pinocchio.
I'm just so biased to this film. I loved every single moment of this film because it was just a wildly unique film that Aronofsky took me on for this ride. So I gave this film a perfect rating. If anybody wants to follow me on TikTok, it's at Miss Filmingo, or my Instagram. I gave it a perfect rating of like a 10 out of 10, A+, like on my scale. It definitely is going to be like one of my favorite films of the year.
Yeah, most definitely. For me, I'm still, the biggest thing that I'm still trying to figure out, like I said, there's still a couple more movies that I got to watch for the rest of the year. I still got to watch Avatar. I still got to watch Babylon, Glass Onion, a couple other ones that I'm also catching up on as well. I also caught up on
like Glass Onion.
That's what I've heard. That's what I've heard is that it is better than Knives Out. Also, I just recently watched one of the Sundance hits from earlier this year, Amazon's Emergency, and that is a lock for my top 10. That movie was that movie was
interesting,
awesome. I love that movie.
And
what's it called? Yeah. So there's a couple more, like I said, because the biggest thing, and I was talking to Dustin about this as well, is there have been a lot of movies that dropped in the last couple months, and I'm like, where the hell were these for the rest of 2022?
Yeah, like finally, like After Sun, like I've been hearing so many people talk about After Sun, which is a film I really want to see now, and I'm just like,
and then like where the hell were these after
top 10 list?
After arguably like one of the worst movie summers that we have ever had.
It was kind of disappointing knowing we had all the big blockbusters for the summer, and
we
just
had
knowing they
like
were
what,
like
5
mid.
blockbusters that came out of this summer. Half of them, most of them, which like weren't even that good. And since I would say early October, we've had this steady stream of hits that have consistently built throughout. And I'm like, finally, like all the movies that we've been wanting are finally back. You know,
And
so
the only good blockbuster summer movie we had was Top Gun Maverick, and then everything else was just.
well, listen. I know that we had a special moment, right, with Bullet Train and Bodies that week. But again, those were like the August specials. You know, those were really like the blockbusters. Yeah, as far as like the movie that won the summer, it was Top Gun for sure. But yeah, it's like we finally gotten all of these incredible movies, and it's like it sucks because like it's such a rear-loaded year that it's like crap. Now I've got like 20 movies that I got to figure out like which ones are going to be in the top 10. You know,
listen, it's a good thing that we both got time now to catch up, and now everybody's going to go on Christmas break, and we can all just sit around the couch,
nothing but watching
and suck
movies.
up on some popcorn and just enjoy the good quality of family time and watch.
Yes.
Something like Emergency or Bodies.
Exactly. Good quality family fun, which is kind of similar to the movie that we're about to talk about, which is, of course, real quick. So like I said, I gave The Whale 4.5 out of 5 stars just for the technicals and the craft as well. Whether it will make my top 10 of the year, that remains to be seen. But let's talk about a movie that it doesn't exactly posit itself as a family-friendly movie, considering that, again, it is some pretty serious subject matter, but that is Guillermo Del Toro's stop-motion adaptation of Pinocchio. I can say that after last couple of some pretty disappointing entries from Del Toro, who I'm not going to say is one of my favorite filmmakers, but made his bones like one of the most prominent genre filmmakers of the 2000s with his take on Blade 2 and the Hellboy movies and Pan's Labyrinth, and even with, and obviously again with like this big gigantic genre extravaganza with Pacific Rim earlier in the decade, and then he transitioned into making some more like awards fare. And I can safely say I am not a fan of his awards bait movie. I am not a fan of The Shape of Water. I do not think that deserved to win Best Picture at all. I don't understand any of the arguments.
Someone else agrees with me.
Listen, I have heard all the arguments towards why that movie is good and why that movie should have won Best Picture. I don't agree with any of them.
Yeah.
I don't. I think it's mid, and I think Nightmare Alley is even worse. Talk about.
Oh no, I love Nightmare Alley.
So talk about, for me, what was, again, while I didn't like the movie per se, probably the most surprising Best Picture entry, because as far as, if you would ask me what the 10th entry for last year's Best Picture race was going to be, Nightmare Alley would not have been one that I would have picked at all. So that was a nomination that kind of came out of nowhere for me personally. I thought there were parts of the movie that I liked. I thought Bradley Cooper, it didn't really work for me until the last bit.
I liked him in that.
But so
I thought he was good.
But so the point that I'm getting to is that Del Toro, to me, works best when he is working with ultimately non-human characters, right? And I think
That's a good way to put it.
Well, what's not worked about me for these last couple of years is he's essentially trying to show like people as monsters, but also not. And it doesn't work as well. It doesn't have the same effect, you know?
And I have to go off of that because I don't know if you watched the miniseries that came out.
Oh, Cabinet of Horrors? No, I haven't yet.
I mean, I must say he does a unique job of creating monsters, and I think that's a great way how he can explore different like. And there are some like human stories. He doesn't direct them. He brings out like unique other underground horror filmmakers like the indie ones and gives them the shine, but. It's a unique experience, I must say, for Cabinet of Horrors.
Also, I'll say that this is not his first animated effort that he has put forth for Netflix, right? I would argue that he has been kind of one of the champions of animation on Netflix. Netflix recently, I think, like closed their animation department or something like that, which sucks because some of the animated stuff that they were putting out was actually like pretty.
Especially Mitchell's versus Machines. My goodness, one of my favorites.
Which wasn't even an original. Then that was a Sony dump. That was a Sony
they
dump.
Picked that up.
That Netflix picked up and then ended up being a massive success. And I'm like, man, if that had come out in theaters, that would have, I think, been.
It would have bombed in theaters, but knowing Netflix was able to buy it.
Yeah, so you have a stop motion adaptation of Pinocchio that I think is much closer in spirit to the original novel that it is based on, rather than the Disney movie. You don't have you have a lot more of like surrealist images. You have a lot more of like, it feels more like folklore rather than like fun cutesy kids, and it's just perfect. It's a stop motion movie from Del Toro. We've only been able to like watch about the first 20 minutes of it, but still, it's like everything about this just works. The animation is impeccable. This is no doubt winning animated feature at the Oscars. I swear to God, like if Turning Red wins against this movie, I'm gonna be pissed.
And it's hard to say because there's so many animated films that were released this year, like Turning Red, like Lightyear.
Not that many good ones, though. I would argue.
Yeah, they weren't all that strong, but Pinocchio seems to be the front runner in its quality and presentation towards it. immaculate what he pulled off, because the unique thing was, I was like, this could have been a Lenka Studios film. Knowing the way
it may as well be, as far as like the stylization of it, but I would argue that it's funny because I recently watched, because we also watched you also had the Wendell and Wild movie that came out back in October, the Henry Selick, Jordan Key and Peele movie, and that one also felt like a Leica movie as well. So it's like you've had this recent trend of stop motion movies that have come out of Netflix, and I would say that this one definitely hit a little bit harder for me because, again, like, to me, Del Toro works best when he is making not childlike affair, that's the wrong word to use, children's stories within these very mature settings.
Dark, I think that's fantasies.
Exactly.
Like, it's almost like fantasies. Not Pan's Labyrinth, David Bowie film.
Labyrinth.
Labyrinth, thank you. I couldn't think of it.
Same name, just take off the Pan's part, you know? But it's funny that you mentioned that, though, because the thing about Pan's Labyrinth is that, again, I think that is where he does it best, which I think is why a lot of people consider that to be his best movie, because, again, it is ultimately a story of childlike loss of innocence and coming of age, this fairy tale, this fable almost, set against the backdrop of this horrific time in human history. And this movie's no different, even though it's animation. You know, obviously, Pan's Labyrinth was set against the backdrop of the Spanish Civil War, and this movie is set against the backdrop of the Italian, when the fascist regime was in charge in Italy. That choice is done very deliberately, but I like that they are able to incorporate that into the story in a natural way that doesn't feel forced. And that is, and them setting that as the backdrop for the movie, I think, and also it having started out with this very, very, again, emotional. This is quite a weekend for the emotional tearjerkers, because I know Sam Mendes' Empire of the Light is also out in theaters this weekend as well. But again, this very, very emotional setting where, again, Geppetto creates the puppet as a drunken reaction to the fact that his son is killed in a bombing. In a bombing that happens for their small town. It's very sad and it's very emotionally impactful. And so that kind of sets the trajectory of it. But it's like, I'm just looking at the animation, and it's just like, every time I do stop motion, like the story of behind the scenes of whenever they could do a stop motion movie is always more interesting to me than the movie itself, because I'm just like, the fact that they pulled this off and the amount of hours and time and works that it goes into just capturing a single frame of this movie, it is always majestic, and how they're able to put so much life. It's like, people, again, I've been an animation nut. I've been championing animation since I started this podcast, since before I started this podcast. And it's like, whenever I see stuff like this that so straddles the line between like what I call surrealism and realism, because again, it's not watching drawings, you're watching things that have actually been constructed, simulate movement as well. You know, it's like, that's the stuff that always just like blows my mind as far as that goes, you know? And as well, again, it's Del Toro, and he's got, like, again, all of his usual suspects. Again, this is a massive voice cast, like Ewan McGregor, Ron Perlman, John Turturro, Cate Blanchett, Tilda Swinton, Finn Wolfhard has a bit part in this movie. Bern Gorman is the priest. Christoph Waltz has a villainous role in this movie as well. Like,
anything where Christoph Waltz is a villain is you gotta watch it.
Depends on the movie, because like again, there was that brief period of time right after Django Unchained where he was just in all these movies, and it's like Hollywood just didn't know how to utilize him outside of Tarantino's movies. So that did happen quite a bit. So like I said, so you've only seen how much of this movie?
Oh God, I want to say a little more than 30 minutes, like maybe at least the first hour, I want to say.
All right. Yeah, so, I think I've seen about like the first 40 minutes was what I got to before I fell asleep last night. But I can't wait to finish it. It's immaculate. It's perfectly made. I definitely recommend that everyone go watch it. It will definitely get a nomination for animated film, even if it doesn't
definitely
win. So,
and let me just tell y'all, it is hands down. Waste your time on this film than the other film, the other Pinocchio. Watch this.
That's not even a question. That's not even a question. Like, I'm sorry.
Like, ignore the Disney Plus. Watch this one.
Just fucking, like, just, you don't even need to look at the god awful, like, just horrifying animation in that other movie, which again, it's like, wow, I thought that Robert Zemeckis had already ruined his career single-handedly with that god awful Witches movie that came out with Anne Hathaway back in 2020, and then he puts out this, and I'm like, oh my god, like, what is happening here? But the good thing is that I think that people for the most part have turned on the Disney live action adaptations, and rightfully so, because those movies have all been awful, and people are like kind of aware of how cynical and how those movies are kind of only made in order to like generate revenue and all that, and this movie, it's like, but forget the animation of the horrible. Just look at Tom Hanks and that awful wig he's on. Like, how Tom Hanks has single-handedly been the worst part in two of my least favorite movies of this year. That also being like his whatever the fuck he was doing as Colonel Parker in Elvis. Like, what the hell? I still can't make heads or tails of that performance.
I don't know what was going on.
And that's already on top of the fact that I despise Baz Luhrmann and everything that he does with movies. I'm just like, what the hell? Like,
it's interesting how Baz Luhrmann has taken an interesting dive with his career, because like I enjoy Moulin Rouge and stuff like that. Like, I enjoy his earlier work. Nowadays with his work, I'm just like questioning it.
Yeah, and it's like I can safely say I've never been a fan of his movies, but this was just like the icing on the cake. But then I hear about the amount of people that loved Elvis, and I'm like, oh my god,
because it's Austin Butler.
But no, I see. I think it goes even further than that. I think it's the Bohemian Rhapsody curse, because again, for as much as we listen, because for as much as we fucking despise that movie, and rightfully so. That movie was one of the highest grossing movies of 2018. People
which is like amazing to me.
Watching it, and I'm like,
thank God I wasn't one of those people that went to go see it in theaters. I rented it at home, and I was just
I fell asleep.
That movie won for best editing is still baffling to me, and it makes me wonder.
That is just embarrassing. Like that to me was the instance of it's like, yeah, the Oscars have just fully given over. They have fully revealed themselves. They are just popularist whores. That's all they are.
I don't want to nominate popular actors either when they're in good roles.
I'm just like, fuck this, man. Like,
and I will be like really disappointed if Elvis gets nominated for best editing.
And it's going well.
It is probably going to be.
It probably will be, which sucks because
they don't know what to nominate.
The first hour of that movie, I remember sitting there with my buddies Dalen and our friend Nathaniel, who's been on our Oscars prediction podcast, and I'm looking at them both, and I'm like, I feel like I'm gonna have a stroke just watching this. Like, what is happening here? There's so many cuts happening throughout it. It's like there's a spin, and then there's
more cuts in that film than like it has the same amount of cuts like in a horror movie would.
Do you remember that what's it called? What was it? Remember that 90s Captain America movie and that scene that's been parodied to death where he is jumping to grab his shield? There's like 80 cuts in that one scene, and I'm looking at this and I'm like, I think this has more. I think this first hour has more
probably does. Like, I just imagine like the final cut room or Avid settings that they have, and it's just like this thin as like a slip.
That's exactly it. And like you just see a bunch of editors like just doing lines of code to be like, it needs more. It needs
round eyes with their coffee, be like, how many more cuts we have to make, boss?
So many cuts. But yeah, so that was kind of our little side talk spiel on Elvis real quick and talking about the Oscars. We'll be sure to cover more of that when we do our Oscars episode in a couple of weeks. Like I said, we've got 2 episodes left. That's right. Only 2 episodes left of the year. That's right, people. 2022. And what a year it has been. We'll be doing Avatar, The Way of Water next weekend.
And then I feel bad for you, man.
Oh, really? Have you seen it?
I can't stand Avatar.
Oh, the first one, but not
you. Avatar, I don't even care for the sequel.
Oh,
so
man.
Don't even catch me going
to
the theater to see it.
That's crazy. Listen, I will always show out for my boy Cameron. That man has got the largest schlong and the biggest set of balls I have ever seen on anyone in Hollywood. I don't care what anyone says. Man waits 12 years in between movies, and every time his movies come out, they make all the money in Hollywood. Like that is.
Does that count as a re-release too?
I'm not quite sure because, but that's a different discussion to be had. But the point being is that might go into just his pettiness as well. But like, yeah. Like I could never ever disrespect the GOAT Cameron. But that is it. That is our review of The Whale and Pinocchio. Like I said, be sure to tune into our last 2 episodes that we have of the year, that being Avatar, The Way of Water next weekend before we wrap up the year with Glass Onion in 2 weeks. Kristen, thank you once again for joining me this morning. Where can the good people follow you on the interwebs?
The good people can follow me on Miss Filmingo on Instagram, and then on TikTok at Miss Filmingo as well. I'm also on Twitter at KFilmingo. If Twitter doesn't die at some point,
we'll see. Jury's still out on that one.
And then I'm also on the M&K Productions podcast. We just dropped our Guardians special episode, which was the holiday special. Dom, did you watch it?
I did. And all I can say is I said the same thing about that special that I did about the trailer for Guardians 3, which is that I'm not ready to say goodbye to these guys. I am not. I'm readying myself. I'm getting myself emotionally prepped for it. And I'm like, I'm not ready.
Another film just besides The Whale. I'm going to just like lose my mind in tears with Guardians 3, and
I'm like, and they play oh my god, what's the name? They play In the Meantime by Space Hog, and I'm like, oh come on, like, and they had the moment with Rocket, like I can't do this now. Because we're gonna be here for another hour.
Yes,
it's gonna be emotional.
go check out that episode, Dom. We hope to have you on again soon
Yes,
because
most
we
definitely.
loved you having on
Most
earlier
definitely.
this year.
That was like the longest episode yet, and we still have to top that record. We still have to top it.
No, yeah, you just gotta come on and just spiel about something for like an hour.
Oh, you know I will.
You know how Bob's normal will make the cuts. We just won't cut anything from your end.
Don't cut a goddamn thing. You don't cut a goddamn thing.
But yeah, the good people can follow me on there. I write for a couple different websites from time to time, and then yeah, so thank you for having me, Dom.
Of course, anytime. Like I said, you have been one of several people that has kept this podcast alive throughout 2022. So, of course, I am indebted to you for that alone, amongst many other things. And, of course, you can follow me at Movie Nerd Reviews across all platforms. Be sure to follow the official Talking TV podcast across everything. Instagram, TikTok primarily is where we are most active, on Twitter as well, where I basically just retweet everything that I see. Be sure to also subscribe to us on YouTube, on Twitch. This episode will be available on Spotify and Apple Podcasts tomorrow. And as always, people, for myself and Kristen, 12 seasons in a short film, and watch more fucking movies. We'll see you guys next time.